Welcome to another edition of Iconic Sonics. I'm Mike Gastineau. Our thanks to Swinomish Casino and Lodge and Dick's Drive-In Restaurants. Now, we love all of our guests on Iconic Sonics. They're all great. They're all fun to talk to. They're all big-time basketball people. But occasionally we get a guest who lives up to the name of the show. And if you want to think about an iconic Sonic, if you're going to make a list, somewhere near the top of that list should be our guest today, Spencer Haywood, who was iconic enough just in what he did on the court. He became a Hall of Famer. He had a great career, but he also was iconic for things that happened off the court. We'll talk about all of that today. Spencer, you are an icon, and welcome back to Seattle, and thanks for doing Iconic Sonics for us.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Let's go Sonics.
We got thinking about this because it's hard for me to believe. I remember the night well, 15 years ago, February 26th, your jersey, you were the sixth Sonic, and I think the final one to have your jersey retired into the rafters, jersey number 24. It was such a great night. I seem to recall, and you can fill in the blanks for me, but you were a little nervous coming up. It had been a few years. Would people in Seattle remember and know? And you were just, you were so warmly received. What are your memories of that night and seeing your jersey go up to the rafters?
Well, it was an awesome night. Looking out on the floor and watching Portland Trail Blazers versus the Seattle Supersonics, which was pretty iconic in itself.
Sure.
And the score was a 24-point difference win by the Sonics. And
is that right?
In my jersey, number 24. And and when the jersey went up, Kevin Durant said, "That's the dude that made it possible for all of us guys." And so he was running his mouth a bit about it. And it was a pretty great night because the fans came out to see me, and they remembered what I had did and what I had did for the Sonics and what I had did for the league. So it was just an awesome night. My family was there, Freddie Brown, Slick Watts, Lenny Wilkins, just a number of former Sonics. It was just an awesome night. I just get a little choked up thinking about it. And at that same time, we had lost DJ, Dennis Johnson. So that was kind of a good thing, but a bad thing.
Well, that's another anniversary. And it was just a few days before. And it was the right thing to do, but I thought it was so magnanimous of you to include DJ in it. And hey, he wore 24 too. And
yes,
and we all wish he was 52. He died of a heart attack, far too young. Like I said, I think most people would have done that, but congratulations to you for having the ability to step outside on one of the biggest nights of your life and say, I'm going to include DJ in this too. That must have been a neat feeling for you in retrospect.
Very neat, because DJ Dennis Johnson and that iconic Sonic team had won the championship, so it's just out of respect. And also, DJ was just such a wonderful player and a wonderful human being. And I had Lenny Wilkins, I had Bob Blackburn, and some of the other people were there. So it was just one of those iconic and beautiful nights. And I must say, I got to thank David Stern for help putting that on, as well as Clay Bennett. I didn't know at the time that he was trying to move the Sonics out of there, and that would be the last jersey that would be hanging before he took the team out of town.
That's an interesting point, and I had that in my notes. It would mean a lot to everybody if the Sonics get back here, and I believe they are. I believe with the new arena they've got built, and I think the NBA wants to come back here. But for the six guys who have their jerseys in the rafters, and for the next couple guys in line, who I believe are named Gary Payton and Sean Kemp, I can't imagine what it would. Let me ask you, what would it mean? How much did it hurt to see the Sonics leave, and what would it mean to you to see it come back here and to see that jersey 24 again hanging up in the rafters?
Oh gosh, it would be so awesome to see the Sonics back in Seattle. And it is very important that the Sonics are back in Seattle, because the Sonics gave the NBA all of its wealth that it has today. When Sam Schulman and I fought this case breaking up the 4-year rule, because before I came along, you had to wait for 4 years after your high school class had graduated before you could go into the NBA. And at that time, we only had 14 teams. And so the NBA didn't have a draft pool in which to pull from. So breaking that rule, we were able to expand to where we are today. And also it gave the owners have had a chance to increase their ownership in terms of dollars, because each team at that time was averaging around 300 to 500 million dollars, and now they're sitting around $3 billion. So Seattle has given us all of this for the NBA. So it's just only fair that we have this team back in Seattle. And I was recently with Gary Payton, and I was saying, you know, it would be nice to see your jersey hanging up. He just, I mean, it's almost like you could see his eyes kind of welting up a little bit, because, you know, we are talking about bleeding Sonics here. I'm talking about he bleeds Sonics through and through. And I threw the idea out to him. I said, you know, you're such a great coach, and I watch him, you know, with his coaching career. And I said, wouldn't it be ironic that you would be the first coach to coach the new Sonics when they come back? And we both started choking up and just gotten, you know, really overwhelmed. And then I said, man, you and Sean Kemp, man, will be the next two on the line for the jersey retirement. And he's just beside himself. And I love him. I love both of these gentlemen. I love the Sonics. I love Seattle. Remember when I came to Seattle, I came from Denver, and I was landing. Sam had picked me up. They picked me up on the private plane. I was coming into Bowen Field, and I was looking over, and I couldn't believe what I was landing in. And so I was telling Sam Schulman, it looks as if I'm flying into a postcard. It was so beautiful in Seattle, the trees, the water. So it was just a beautiful trip. And then when I landed, we had a young ball boy who was there greeting me as well, with Lenny Wilkins and Rod Thorne and Tom Masheri. And at that year, we had no one coaching in a suit. Everybody was a player coach.
Right, because Lenny kind of ran the show, right?
Yeah, Lenny was the head coach. Rod Thorne was the assistant coach, and Tom Masheri was the associate coach. And we all had on uniforms. And then we had Rick Welts, who was the ball boy at 15. And he was escorted to send me around and to be with me, because we were closer in age than Lenny and the other guys, because he was 15 and I was 20. So we would ride over to Seattle University, over to the University of Washington. It was just a beautiful time.
What was it like from you on the court? You could compete, you could hold your own from the minute you stepped in. You had one of the great seasons, and maybe the greatest season in ABA history. Then you come up here and you can compete right away. But as you mentioned, age-wise, you were, I hesitate to say you were a kid, but you were a real young man, and maybe even bordering still on a kid. And suddenly here's Lenny Wilkins, here's Masheri, here are these men that you're playing with. How tough was that for you to kind of come to grips with and to assimilate into?
Well, to assimilate into it, you know, I don't want to forget Garfield Hurd, Don Koges, Zayd Abdulaziz, which was Don Smith at the time, Dick Snyder, all of us. They were protectors for this young guy coming in, and at the same time, I was going through this Supreme Court. So our first game at the Sonics, you know, I walk out on the floor, and the NBA had hooked me up with an injunction. And they said, ladies and gentlemen, he will play tonight's game, but after tonight's game, he has a 10-day injunction. So he has to not play again. So I would sit at the Washington, you know, the Washington Towers, Washington Plaza at that time, which is the old Westin Hotel, and just look out over that water and say, wow, one of these days soon. And then when I got a chance to play, the next time they said, ladies and gentlemen, we have an illegal player on the floor. This game is being played under protest.
Right.
And so they would boo and throw things on me and say, "Go back to college. You can't play in the NBA. We don't allow that here. This is not the ABA. Come on, what do you think this is?" And I was like, I got Lenny, I got Tom Sherry, I got Rod Thorne, I got the Sonics, I got Sam Schumann, who is backing this whole process, you know? And so I went out and kept playing, and we went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court looked at our case and said, you know, we send young men to the war in Vietnam. We do all of these things, and this is the only sport, I remember distinctly, this is the only sport other than football where you cannot go in as a young person and play. You got tennis where they playing 14, 15 years old, 16. You have hockey, you have baseball, all of the other non-revenue sports for the colleges and the universities. You could go in and play early. Revenue sports, which is basketball and football, they said, no, we want to stick you in here for 4 years. And so to kind of make our revenue going. But by the way, we are a nonprofit.
Right. Sure. Well,
Sure.
and the thing is, you not only had the physical skill, the basketball ability to compete, you had you could legitimately look anybody in the eye and say, I have got to help my family. You were coming from a very poor background. Talk about your mom and about the situation in Mississippi, and then you ended up in Detroit. But you weren't somebody just out here to just prove a point. You were really trying to get money for your family.
Yeah, well, I'm from a farming community, which is not farming, but they call it sharecropping, but it wasn't sharecropping. It was just, you were owned by the farmer, and you would go out and you pick cotton from sun up to sundown, you plant cotton, you would do all of the field work. And so my family had been doing that since they were born, since they were, brought over in this country to do that type of work, and slaves. And so my mom had been working for all of those years, and her back had went out. And so she couldn't drag the sack of 100 pounds. So she was crawling on the ground, picking cotton for $2 a day. And so I had to go up north to Detroit to finish my high school, because the farmers had decided that this is a big kid, and the best way to keep him on the farm and make him a good farm worker is to put him in jail for a little while, and then he's relegated to the farm. So they had put me in jail for a couple of nights, and then I got out of jail, and then my mom shipped me right off to Detroit. So when I arrived in Detroit, I was trying to finish my high school and maybe go to college down in Bowling Green State University, where my brother had went to college. But my mom was just struggling and struggling. My family was still struggling, trying to survive on $2 a day. And here's the opportunity to go play professional basketball. And I had to take the opportunity, because my family was dirt poor. There was no other option for me. I was the breadwinner. I was the gifted one. I was the one that everyone looked at and said, this is the guy that can bring us up out of slavery. So the opportunity came about, and Sam Schumann, my gosh, he put his franchise on the line.
Yeah.
The science was put on the line for this case.
And you talk about the situations in Mississippi. We think of that stuff as happening, 100 years ago. This is the mid 60s we're talking about, right? What they throw you in jail for? What charge did they?
Well, they said that over at the country club, this guy named Willie Harris, he welded a quarter onto a nail. He nailed it into the windows, because we wasn't allowed to go and drink out of the white fountains or do any of this stuff like that. So I was a caddy over at this country club. So they nailed the quarter. He nailed the quarter onto the stand. So when I would go to the window to try to get me some nabs and some Coke and a Coca-Cola to keep me nourished,
sure,
I was trying to pick this quarter off, and it wouldn't leave. So he reached out and punched me, and I was like, oh man, why did you do that? And so I got upset, and they called in Jack Purvis. Jack Purvis is the sheriff from Belzoni. He came in with his gun hanging low like the old cowboy movies. And he said, you got to go to jail. You're disturbing the peace. And that was part of the farmers' deal where, you know, you go to jail. And I stayed in that calaboose. They call it a calaboose, not a jail. At the calaboose for 2 nights. And then when I got out of there, my mom said, we've went through this before with other young men here. So you have to leave. So we could not leave from my hometown because the farmer were watching the bus station saying, well, you know, you cannot leave. So we went up to Belzoni and we caught the bus from there and we rode on up to Detroit.
What was your mom's name?
Eunice Haywood.
What, as you've gotten, you know, all of us as we get older, I think we appreciate more and more what our parents did for us. And I'm sure you appreciated that in the moment, but you think back on it and she was putting her life at risk. She was putting on the line. Everything. Well, I mean, can you even fathom that as you look back on it, the bravery it took for her to say, we have got to get you out. She's saying goodbye to her son. She may never see you again.
Saying goodbye to her son and did not know who was going to adopt me, who was going to raise me or anything, but you got to get up north. You got to get to Detroit. Hopefully your brother can do something to help you because he drew the short straw. So he was raised in Michigan, in Detroit. And so when I got to Detroit, my first big entry to Detroit was at this place called Crunk Outdoors. I know most people think Crunk boxing, and it had the indoor boxing for all of the great boxers, Tommy Hearn, all of those boxers, but they had the outdoor courts. And there was a big tournament. My brother brought me up from Bowling Green, and we had a tournament where we were playing against all of the great high school players in the Michigan, for the state of Michigan. And then they had the university players, which was Cassie Russell and Bill Buttons and all of those guys who were playing at Michigan and Michigan State and so on at Ohio State. They all came to this tournament. And then they had the pros would play. My brother said, you know what? Let me register you in this high school tournament. So I went out and played in this high school tournament. At first, I knew that these guys were a little soft. This when they were throwing away all of their gym shoes because they didn't want to wear the gym shoes that was given to them. And I had a pair of Converse with my bottom hat came out. So I had cardboard in my Converse. And so they throwing away these shoes. So I'm telling these guys in the locker room, can I have these shoes? Because so many people in Silver City need these shoes.
Wow.
And so they gave me all the shoes and I put on a pair of fresh Converse with a nice bottom to it. I went out there and had 27 points, 15 rebounds, and all of the coaches were like, wait a minute, he can't be this good. Let's see what he do against the college guys. And I played against the college players and I had 17 points and 10 rebounds. They said, wait a minute. And you say he's 15 years old? All right. He can play on Dave Bing's team. And Dave Bing was with the Pistons. He said, come on over, young boy, and let's play with us. So I had 16 points and 9 rebounds. And then Will Robinson, who was he ended up being the first Black coach in NC2A Division I history. He said, I want him. And he said to me right on the court. And when I came off the court, he said, you know what? Here at Pershing High School, we have been playing with mules, and you are a horse. So I want you to play with us. And at that time, the city of Detroit was like the mayor, Kavanaugh, and all of those people who were saying, you know, this could be the kid that will lead us to a Class A state championship, because we have had a drought for over 35 years in the Class A state championship. No team from the city of Detroit had won it. And so everybody got behind me. Will Robinson adopted me along with James and Ida Bell. And my mother came up north to make sure the adoption was good and signed. And she says, I can't stay here because I got to go back to my church. I don't know anything about these people in Detroit. And they was giving her a house and everything, but she was like, no, I just don't want to. I want to stay in Silver City, Mississippi. I know where I belong. So, wow. So she stayed there and I went on to high school there, and we did win the Class A state championship. Will Robinson ended up being the first Black coach in Division I NC2A history. So, and then the following year, I'm in this little place at Trinidad State Junior College, because what happened, I signed with the University of Tennessee out of high school as the first Black to sign with Tennessee to play in the Southeast Conference, because I wanted my mom to see me play when I played against Mississippi and Mississippi State.
Sure.
And at that time, Adolph Rupp had lost, the University of Kentucky had lost to Western Kentucky. I'm not at Western Kentucky.
Texas Western.
Western.
Right.
Western. So he said, I have the rights for the first Black player to come in this conference, in this league, and down south. And so there was this argument going on between Ray Mears, who was the coach at Tennessee, and Adolph Rupp. And Will Robinson said, you got to get out of here. You don't want to be in a pissing contest. And so I ended up at this junior college. Luckily for me, I ended up at the junior college because the Olympic year was coming up for the '68 Olympics.
Right.
And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar boycotted, Alvin Hayes boycotted, Wesley Unseld boycotted. They don't say they boycotted, but you know, that was the year of the boycott.
Right.
And, so they came looking for young freshmen to see if they could play. Now the NC2A, you could not play as a freshman. If you were in a Division I or Division II school, you couldn't play as a freshman. But as a junior college player, everything was wide open. So
Sure.
Jerry Tarkanian, who was the coach, he wasn't the coach at UNLV at the time, but he was the coach at a junior college.
Yeah.
He said, I got the best player ever. So they flew us all in down to Hutchinson, Kansas, to assemble a team. And in the meantime, they had, in cold blood, they were taping in cold blood with Truman Capote.
Right. Right.
so
That's
we
all
were
going
excited.
on.
Yeah, so we were excited. That's a sidebar. So we ended up getting a team together and then going down to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I played in like 4 games. And Hank Iber said to Jerry, Jerry, don't you get that boy hurt now. This could be one of our players on the Olympic team. Because I was like thinking, hey, you know what? I'm going to go down to Albuquerque, get me some nice gear, you know, and go back to Detroit, show my guys, hey, I tried out for the Olympic team.
Right.
And lo and behold, he picked me first to save America. So here's another catch with the story is we have to now submit our passport, our birth certificates and everything to get the passport so that we could then go off to Russia, Yugoslavia, and on around back into New York. It was a European tour before we hit Mexico City. So they called my mother and they had to call the grocery store down the street from my mother because we didn't have a phone. So she came over and they said, we can't find his birth certificate. She says, Lord, baby, I got the boy's birth certificate right here in the Bible. He's under John 21.
Mom's keeping it in the Bible.
Because I was born by midwife. So they had to send the Jackson Daily News and the Jackson Vital the statistics down to Silver City, and they took pictures of everything. They get the birth certificate, and they created a birth certificate in Jackson, Mississippi, and here I was off to the Olympics. And we get down there, and then it was a boycott going on.
Right.
68. Here you go with the 2 guys that everybody had the cameras on was Tommy Smith and John Carlos. They were like the guys, and so we were like, whoa. And Hank Iber was like, now let me tell y'all something. Don't you go near that some bitches.
I don't need that.
I don't want this shit, so we was like, oh, John and Tommy would come over to us. Like, I was like, hey, can't talk. And plus I'm just 19 years old. I don't want to talk to nobody.
Right.
And then George Foreman, who was there for boxing, he was like, whatever we do, we got to stay together. We're buds. We're going to eat this place out of a home. And we go, a commissary, because we were both starving all the time because we were 19. So And between us and the Russians and the Yugoslavs, we were like eating everything that they threw in front of us. So we ended up winning the gold medal, and life was just good. So from there, I went to Denver, and then from Denver to Seattle. Seattle, the land of beauty. My family still lives in Seattle.
Is that right?
My sisters and my brothers and all of them came up to Seattle when I made it, because that was the deal we made in the cotton fields. Whoever make it will give the line of brothers and sisters a shot.
Sure,
So
sure.
when they came up there, and with my simple brother named Andrew, he was like, I don't want to be in Washington, D.C.
Hey, you had to clue Andrew in. And, Spencer, you mentioned a few times in segment one about Sam Schulman and what he meant to you. He was the original owner of the Sonics, along with Eugene Klein out of San Diego. And Sam Schulman approached you and said, we want you to come to the NBA, and it's against the rules, but I'm going to fight this with you. That's kind of how it went, right? He says, we will fight this together and we'll go to court.
Well, what was happening was the ABA was taking all of the NBA stars. They had taken Rick Barry and so on. And so Jerry Colangelo from the Phoenix Suns and Sam Schulman said, these were the two expansion teams and the two owners that was, like really rebels. So Sam Schulman, Jerry Colangelo had went and took Connie Hawkins out the year before with the Phoenix Suns. So Sam Schulman said, I want the next MVP. And so I was the MVP in the ABA. So when the ABA did not live up to their agreement with the contract, Sam Schulman saw the opportunity to then bring me to Seattle and perhaps set me for a year, or we would fight the case. And my young lawyer at that time, a young gentleman named Al Ross, he was like adamant that, Sam, we need to fight this. We need to change the rules. We need to get in with the times. This is ABA. We don't live like NBA rules. So Sam Schulman said, okay, fine. And not knowing that this case would go all the way. And at that time, he had former Governor Pat Brown on my team, Frank Rothman, the head of the MGM conglomerate, all of their attorneys. So we filed suit for me to play. And then the NBA filed suit along with the ABA and along with the NC2A for me not to play, because it would be a violation of all of the rules. And at that time, Sam thought perhaps it would, the case would cost maybe $300,000. And that case ended up at $1.7 million.
Wow. In 1971 dollars too.
$1971. So he paid all of that money for this case. And he showed me, as he would always say, I'm going to teach you about Jewish loyalty. Brooklyn. So I kept saying, Sam, I mean, can we just back off, and then I'll sit for the rest of the year and maybe go into the draft and you get me again. You're like, they wouldn't let me get you. What are you talking about? We got to fight this thing, and we're going to fight it all the way to the Supreme Court, and you are my player, and we're going to keep you here in Seattle. You mean that much to the Seattle, the community and the team. So we're going to fight this. So I was like, hey, let's fight.
Yeah.
We battled all the way through, all the way to the Supreme Court.
You touched on it in the first segment a little bit, but I kind of want to reiterate that it was so crazy that in Seattle, I think you were almost always able to play, but you guys would go out on the road and you might be like in Cincinnati, and it'd be 10 minutes before game time, and they'd announce that they had an injunction and you were going to not be allowed to play that night. I mean, how crazy is that when you're out there?
How crazy is that? Let me explain it to you. Seattle, we playing against the Cincinnati Royals, and I get ready to jump ball, and they says, ladies and gentlemen, we have an illegal player on the floor, number 24. I've heard that before. Yeah. So, but this time we have an injunction, and this injunction will put him off the grounds in which this arena is set on. So they escorted me off the floor, off the grounds, out into the snow, and I'm standing out there freezing my tush off, and And there's this police that was supposed to guard me to keep me from coming back into the arena, because normally I'd sit on the bus or something like that when I would have an injunction to stay in the locker room. But this time they pull out all of the stops and just put me out into the snow. And they said, listen, we're probably going to lose our job for this one, but you're going to get in this goddamn car and we're going to warm you up because you're going to freeze out there, young boy.
Wow.
So they put me in the car and we sit around talking about how this case would go and what was happening and why. And that's why to this day, I still have affinity for the police department. They took me out of the snow and put me in there. So then we get back into the car and we drive on back to the airport and move on to the next locations. And they still had the injunction against me for all those games. So I had to just stay in the hotel until we reached my injunction against the league so I could play.
Wow. And Sam, along the way, I mean, I'm assuming you guys stayed close throughout the rest of his life and at least talked to time. I mean, you had to feel a special bond with this guy. And obviously, look, he's trying to prove a point, but he also is trying to protect his business. He's like, Spencer's going to help my business. But there was more to it.
It was personal. It was
right.
Personal. It was not like that. He knew that my father had died a month before I was born. He knew that I had been adopted and raised in Detroit. And so he took it over on himself. I'm your new father. I'm your new family, you know? So he just took it upon himself. And he was always talking about this Jewish loyalty. And so when even before he died, Sam would always invite me, like, I don't know if he spent that much time with any other players, but even if we would go out to Hillcrest in Beverly Hills, I call it the Jewish country club. So Hillcrest, let's go to Hillcrest. And, so you had a lot of all of the great Shucky Green and all of the great, comedians and stuff like that was there. And Sam, this is my boy. He's black, but this is my boy. Come on.
Come on, Sam.
He was so proud of what we had accomplished. And he was saying, the NBA don't know it yet, and they will never admit it yet. But in time, they are going to admit that what we did for the league is going to be etched in history. And it is now being etched in history. This is 51 years coming up on March 1st of that case that changed the world of basketball as we know it.
Yeah. And allowed for freedom of trade, kind of. You should be allowed to go earn a living if someone wants to hire you and pay you.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, I'm going to take a stab in the dark. I don't know if you ever met this guy. I know you know his name. It was a different battle, but some people call you the Curt Flood of basketball. But Curt Flood's battle was different. He was just trying to say baseball players should have free agency at some point. We should be able to go where we want. He took his fight all the way to the Supreme Court too, and it was about the same time as yours. Did you?
Yeah, it was. I know. I met Curt. Curt. Yeah, and Curt was like, he was like, what are you doing? You're 20, 21 years old. Why are you doing? I've had like 8 seasons, 9 seasons in the league. And they giving me hell. And so what happened was after I won my case, Curt was in at the Supreme Court and they didn't give him his case. They gave it, they gave it 1 more year and they gave it to Andy Musclesmith, but everybody knew it. Right. Curt Flood ruled.
Right.
And Curt Flood, he could not live in this country anymore because he had to move out of this country, went and lived on the islands. And when he came back, he was an older man and he just died without those players knowing what contribution he has. He had made for baseball. And so one of the things that I have been in a fight for years was that I wanted my name on my ruling. You can't say it's early entry. You can't say it's one and done. You can't say all this things because all of that is out. And name it for what it is. It's Haywood versus the NBA. You don't need to have that. You just need the Spencer Haywood rule. Thus, they tried to give my ruling to Larry Bird. So they have the Larry Bird exception. So it's not Larry Bird rule. It's my rule.
Yeah. Yeah, and it opened the door for any kid who's good enough to play in the pros to be able to play when he decides. And then if he decides and the market is there, he can go play. And if it's not, then that's free market economics there at work.
Yeah, and what happened is that it has created over $34 billion in players' salary
and increasing every year.
Increasing every year. And guess what? We were doing a survey, Adam Silver and I were just talking. He said, we're looking to change this name on this ruling very soon for you. But I'm surprised that maybe 5% of my players know what you did.
Right. And that's, that's how history works sometimes. It's unfair, but people don't realize who are the people who walked in the footsteps ahead of me that kind of cleared the path.
Yeah.
A little bit.
And you're that guy. When we walked in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned liberal, cool place up north.
Yeah,
not in Washington D.C. as Andrew was saying.
Well, we got to keep Andrew straight as to where it is. Right. Lenny Wilkins, you mentioned, and a guy who this city embraced, in the early 70s as the player coach, and he became the first real superstar in this city's history, mm-hmm. and you as well. But Lenny, and you mentioned him kind of having your back. What do you remember about playing for Lenny and about those teams in the early 70s? What made him a good coach?
What made Lenny Wilkins a good coach is he was a former player. He understood what a player thinks and what was happening. But in my case, he had to babysit me and do a lot of other things. So he had to keep me calm because we were fighting such a mega battle that when we finally won the case and then we just would play, Lenny Wilkins could, one time I ripped the ball off the court, off the backboard, and I threw it out to Lenny. And Lenny said, run down the middle. And I was running down the middle and he just hit me. And I was so pumped up that I just took off from the free throw line and dunked it. Bam! And I looked all around and said, yeah! And everybody was like, is that how they do it in the ABA? And they said, they're gonna love it. Just keep doing it. And he was just such an awesome, he could always penetrate the hole, drop it on you the right way. And he was just such a great teacher of life, of basketball. And that's what made him such a great coach. And he still is such a great individual because he cared, he loved. And he's, to this day, every year I would come up and play in the Lenny Wilkins golf tournament and his foundation work that he's done for the city of Seattle and all those wonderful things he's done at Odessa Brown Clinic there. He's saved so many lives. So he's got a reserved spot in heaven. This is wonderful.
You're aware, I hope, and if not, I'll tell you that they named the street in front of the new arena Lenny Wilkins Way. So
yeah,
the arena is located.
I was on my way up to surprise him, but it did not work out. But I wanted to come up for that ceremony. That it is Lenny Wilkins Way. Lenny
Wilkins Way. Did anybody in the huddle when he was a player coach, did anybody ever say, Coach Wilkins, I think we got to get player Wilkins out of the lineup. We need somebody with fresh legs in there. Anybody ever confront the player coach that way?
No. No.
Probably wise.
Lenny was just so sharp and such a great player. But he knew when his legs were a little weak at a given time, he would bring in Lee Winfield and all of those young guards, Jake Ford and those guys. Dick Snyder was our guy, Mm-hmm. He would be right there. And then Fred Brown came in the next year.
Right.
And, that was like awesome too.
You played, I think, your last year with Seattle for Bill Russell, right? As mm-hmm. coach. And it's interesting because this ties back to, you were talking about the summer of '68 and all the protests, and a lot of Black athletes didn't even want to go to the Olympics, and the ones who did wanted to protest. And Bill Russell, as a Celtic, was an outspoken athlete at a time when a lot of athletes didn't speak up and talked about human rights and equal rights and civil rights. And now all of a sudden it's 1975 and you're playing for him, another icon. What was it like to suit up for Bill Russell?
It was so great to suit up with Bill Russell. Bill Russell was another great teacher, but he was more of a philosophy teacher mm-hmm. than the court side. We would sit over at the 13 Coins and talk way over into the mornings about life, basketball, about how he marched with Martin Luther King, how he was at the great I Have a Dream speech in Washington at the monument there, and how he made cash contributions to the movement. And gosh, it was just a lesson in history, an oral history lesson from the master. And
Yeah.
in basketball was like, we talked in depth about how to make this team a winner. How do we get to the playoff this year? How do I have to move from power forward and small forward to center, because our centers was not carrying their weight. So he wanted me to play center. And I knew, he said, I know you are an all-pro first team player. This is going to be you're going to be giving up a lot. And so I said, for you, for the Sonics, I mean, everything I own is like with this team. So I gave it up, and we went on and we made the playoffs for the first time in Seattle Supersonics history.
Yeah. With Coach Russell.
Coach Russell. Wow, what a great man. I still carry on conversations with him now. We spend time together. He come here because he spent a lot of time over with Brent Mushberger, who's over at South Point, and that's where Bill Russell come, and he stay at the South Point, and we just all sit around talking about those old wonderful days, man. It's like truly awesome, truly special time. And we was hoping to see him at the 75, but he could not make it. So
yeah, you've lived such an amazing life, and I mean, you think about the choices you made and the stuff you did that you know, to walk in your shoes, it's almost impossible to conceive. I mean, you were a young man when this was happening, and you're a smart guy. Did you have a concept in your head of the impact this was going to have? Did you think to yourself, wow, this is really big what Sam and I are fighting for?
I had somewhat of a sense of reality because of the ambiance around that fight, because it was like media and everybody was like, is he going to play tonight, or can he play? What is going on? So you had that feeling. But as a young player, and just remember now, I'm 21 years old. So
yeah,
you're just thinking, man, I want to be able to go down to the 13 Corners and eat a big steak and enjoy myself. So,
yeah.
so, you know, and I'll tell you one more story about Lenny. So Lenny says, all right, we're playing the Celtics, and you got to really show up tonight. I want you to really show them who you are. But after the game, we're going to go to the greatest seafood place you've ever had. And I was like, oh, okay, great. So we go out and we play, and I have like 40 points and 24 rebounds. And Lenny take me over to this great seafood place. And I walk in there, and I'm like sitting around, they're getting all of these crab, lobster and everything. And I said, sir, can I have a filet mignon? And Lenny was, oh, you're so young.
He's trying
that is his story. Every time you see me, you ordered a steak at the seafood place.
He's just trying to add a little class to your life, and you're like, I just want some steak.
Yeah.
I got to ask you one more story, Spencer, and I appreciate your generosity with your time, but I want to make sure that this is true, because I saw this. I'm like, well, if this is true, I want to hear it from you. Is the story about your sister going onto the floor when you were in a fight with Rick Barry and swinging her handbag at him? Is that true? Did your sister run out?
Both sisters, Laverne and Ivory, they swinging their purse and all kinds of stuff out there on the floor. And so every time somebody would come to Seattle to play the Sonics, they would always, players would like kid me. Connie Hawkins and all of the guys would say, all right, now, if I punch you, I don't want them sisters running out of the stage to protect you. And they were certainly not protected. So that was just, you know, it was just basketball back then. And
who is that? It's Spencer's sisters, and they're swinging their purses.
Coming to take care of him.
Well, it's such a delight to talk with you. And among a million reasons I want the Sonics to come back is to see.
Sonics are coming back.
I believe.
A lot of good conversation about that. And the Sonics will be back in Seattle. It's going to be the most exciting time. And then I'm hoping that Gary Payton would be that sideline coach now, because I can say, I told you so.
Now, if that happens, he's got to hire George Carl as his assistant. So George can
Gotta
spend
have
all,
George because George is the guy that taught him.
well, and George can yell at Gary the way Gary used to yell at George and kind of
Sure.
pay him back.
Perfect. And also, I know that everybody says it's kind of janky to congratulate George, but I'm almost sure he's going to get into the Hall of
Yeah.
Fame this year. Well deserved. You know, George and I started out together way back in the ABA.
Sure.
He was a player. Hello, y'all don't remember? George was a basketball player.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's and I remember you as a Rocket as well. It's great to talk to you. I hope we can do it again. And I hope through this we can continue to make sure that and it's okay. Young people don't always know history. They got to learn it. One way they can learn it is by hearing these stories. And I'm gonna think of Spencer Haywood sitting in a police car in Cincinnati with the heater running just to keep him warm after he's been thrown out of the arena by some judge. You talk about walking through, tough times to get to your Hall of Fame and to get to your career. It's amazing, man. Congratulations on a life and a career so well lived, and continued good health to you. And we'll see you up here hopefully soon.
See you. Sonics forever.
Spencer Haywood, the great, the iconic Spencer Haywood on Iconic Sonics. And our thanks again to Swinomish Casino and Lodge and Dick's Drive-In Restaurants. I'm Mike Gastineau. You can get more information on all of our shows at iconicsonics.com. We'll see you next time.